Today, I'm going to talk about how AI coding is evolving as a product, and it's going to be fun, right? We've been all excited about this for more than a year and a half, 2 years. It's been fun. My name is Patrick Dubois. I have a very particular style. I show a lot of quick slides, but no worries. You can watch the demo, the video, and the slides later. So it's all fun to get there. All right, so let's kick it in. We have tap, tap, go, right? Everybody knows the Copilot, the thing that we do. We write some comments and lo and behold, AI completed this. This is what most people know from there. This is the quick intro. Then kind of things like ChatGPT came, and all of a sudden we have chat, copy, paste instead of just tap, tap, go, right? So we ask it a question, it generates some of the code, and then we'll look at it, we read it, and then if we're really happy with this, we do copy and paste in our IDE. That's what most people know, but that is not at all what we're going to talk about. We're going to go way further than that. So first part, what's all new? What are the crazy new features that we are seeing popping up in all the tools? First thing is, instead of copy and pasting, we can just apply it. Like, just get rid of that copy and paste method. Why are we still doing that? We just say apply this to our file, all good, instant apply. Now, if you've been doing the tab completion, why does it only show one line? Now we finally have multi-line edits, and it's showing a complete block editing instead of having to tap, tap, tap continuously for the next line. Much of an improvement. But it can even go further. We have the tap, tap completion, but the tap, tap is not always kind of the next line. It's trying to predict what is actually the next thing. So if I'm editing a function below, and all of a sudden I'm typing tap, it predicts that I'm going to go on the first line, and it actually jumps for me. A lot of improvements. These are typical things that are now happening in IDEs, but we didn't have it just from the beginning. Then, when all the models beyond OpenAI GPT came out, we are finally able to bring our own model in most of the IDE tools. It's funny that the one advantage that we were thinking, like, oh, the model is going to be the unique thing, all of the editors are opening up to one of the SaaS providers and even running LLMs locally there. So big improvement for privacy, for stuff. And it seems like they're almost giving up to the things they do with the model and giving it directly. Also saves costs, I'll be honest. Now, with the reasoning model, like in O1 in OpenAI, we saw that we're switching between two different kind of models. One is for the editing, and the other one is generating the tasks. In this example, Ada, as one of the tools, is leveraging this reasoning as looking at the code as an architect. Again, this is a new thing you'll see come up more and more in the editing tools of the coding IDEs. Instead of just looking at the one file, it's going to index my code base. Well, GitHub has been doing indexing for all their GitHub repos, but now it starts also indexing my stuff locally, which gives it a better understanding of giving actually my style or the things that I want to do with my code. And then we've talked about this generating tests, but what about generating tests looking at the test coverage? Another great feature that helps us kind of generate more particular, more on brand, what we need to code. All new features, very exciting. And they're existing there today, even though it says experimental. Now, it really get excited on coding when Cursor opened up the floor with multi-file edits. I give it a prompt, and all of a sudden, it's not just changing it in line, it's changing in one file, another file, and more. That has been a lifesaver. All of a sudden, you get like more impact on all the files. Feature that exists today. And then I found myself less typing code. I started to do continuous prompting, and if I didn't like the result that it gave me after reviewing the code, I just gave a follow-up prompt. And that kind of led me to almost continuous prompting and hardly touching the code, but more reviewing the code. It's amazing. The speed has gone through the roof for me, kind of developing new applications. Now, what can we do to even make it better? And there's been a constant thing as these LLMs try to eat more data, more context. So what have we done to get more context in our IDE? Now, this is the second part. Context first is by having an at. Okay, I'm not just typing the question, I'm specifying which file I want to do. But there's way more context that I can do. I can add a terminal, I can add my documentation, a folder, a URL, and kind of even my tickets. Those are features that exist today that will enhance your workflow just beyond the simple code generation by having context providers. And I can even reference my whole kind of workspace, at workspace that understands the whole of my code with everything in it. If it has my front-end code, my back-end code, it will change both at the same time, things that work today. Now, there's been some helpers to get the context in. This is one fun thing, which is kind of play on GitHub, outhub, which takes a URL and actually allows you to add that into a code. So it creates like one big file of that context of an external repo. Useful if you want to bring on like a library, a framework, or how to do things, or mimic code from somebody else. Now, documentation is an easy one. That is web crawling. You can see here the dump of all the docs that are available in Cursor, all the documentations of the frameworks that you can use. So if it has the documentation of the framework and your code, and it knows which version you're running on, you can get amazing, better results than just having the code generation, because these are up to date. These can be updated and added at your own time. Even if you have local documentation in your wiki or wherever, you can add the documentation to your sources. Now, again, another tool to take whatever URL, even a YouTube video, an NPM package, or it doesn't matter, to add context in. So you see, there's a real drive of getting more context in your IDE to give it better results. Now, we've seen a few technical tools that do that for you, but you even start seeing vendors applying this and optimizing their documentation to be used as a context. That's a nice side effect. So we don't have to kind of have an in-between, but much like SEO or mobile optimized, we're going to have AI optimized documentation to be used. Now, documentation is one thing, but maybe you have a coding style and you're some kind of community, whether that's Next.js or Python or JavaScript or Java, they all kind of have their conventions. So you have the code, you have the documentation, and now you can bring in kind of the requirements in a way that, how we do things, how that world works, even if it's a new language that has not been indexed or is not available on any of the ChatGPTs. I've coded in Objective-C, right? There's not a lot of models that have been trained, but this was a lifesaver to do that. Now, let's go further. What can we do? Got documentation, code, all that stuff. People have been craving about, can you please fine-tune how we do things around here? And Github Copilot was one of the first to say, well, we can fine-tune, but it's a double-edged sword. At the one hand, those kind of corporations don't want their stuff to be trained on their kind of publicly. And on the other hand, they're craving to have their own style defined. So this was a bit of a slippery slope, and I don't think that it has gone like completely GA yet. But how do we kind of get around this? Now, much like the documentation, why not have a set of rules, how we do things? And I mentioned this before with the identities of a certain coder, but you can specify your own rules. This is how I want my mobile development. This is my directory structure. This is how I set up my databases. So you have a personal style, even beyond the frameworks or the company style, that you can bring in that rules. And now, again, you can add those rules into the context while asking something to the LLM. Even bringing in a component, because not just the documentation, but you say, I want this kind of UI component to be used in my front end, and then it translates that. Or this framework I want to be used. So that's another way of bringing in context beyond kind of simple code and text generation. So we looked at all of the new stuff. We've shown that there was amazing things that you can now bring into the context. Now, where does it all lead to? Like we've been generating, it's getting better and better. And we all know like a lot of projects actually start with designs. And this is a tool that kind of generates designs, taps all the complete designs. And most of the time you actually have a mock-up of a screen that you need to implement. Now, you now have the way to upload a design. How do I implement the similar UI to this screenshot, this design? Those kind of functions now exist thanks to the multimodal solutions and give you a kind of good head start. And you can even use this when it goes wrong. Like, I don't want it to look like this, but I want it to look like that. Again, powerful features that have been added to it. Now, you started seeing more and more of the developers keeping sessions of what they've been doing on their own style, but also on the specifics of the project and the decisions they've taken and kind of the steps. It's almost like your change log that functionality keeps memory. And it's really interesting that people started to use this as context because it remembered all the previous specifications that were required. Okay, so I have specifications, and then we have another way, like given the specifications, build me a plan. So this is really helpful to kind of see the first steps, the next steps. So internally, when you ask it a prompt, there is a translation to a set of steps. First do this, then do that. And that's kind of part of that reasoning that has built a plan. In the keynote, it was mentioned that, okay, we're going to go for some things in the chat, some things in the editor, and we're going to go to more specifications, and we're going to drive a plan, and eventually we're going to get to code. That's really cool. And I think, kind of taking these specs and making them part of the coding as similar to ADRs or decisions or specifications is a great way to keep them kind of together and to remember kind of the decisions. So we're going from specs to implementation. And then if you really want to go further, we're just looking at all the product requirements, the feature set, and we're doing a mixture between this is how we want things and this is what we want things. And that kind of mixture is a really powerful combo to bring things together and being generated. Now, we have the specifications, and it's generating a massive amount of coding. And I feel that our job is changing from coding to coding being generated. And the thing we do more and more is actually reviewing the code. So what can we do to make that life easier? Because the bottleneck has now shifted to that. There's been interesting things like, hey, I'm changing code. We're very used to the diff view. We've seen that there's a chat view trying to explain the things that we do. But we can now use actually AI to reduce the cognitive load by saying, these things have changed, this matters. So for example, existing code takes away what of the boilerplate, remove the I at the end of the next line. That is the description of a condensed view that it has done. So that helps us faster reviewing of the code that's been generated. Now, another kind of way of improving that review is to break it down in a lot of different steps. Like this file has changed because of that reason. That file has changed because if we're just seeing one big div, it's going to overload our brains. And it's really nice that we start seeing partial acceptance of this file is good, this one I want to change, this one I want to improve. So that's another kind of improvement in cognitive load. Now, this can increase because generation is cheap. So maybe we're not seeing one version, but we're seeing multiple versions. In this case, the front end has 3 flavors, and we'll have to pick one. We can give feedback that improves actually the generation, but it is interesting to see that the cost is going down, so we can make better choices there as well. Now, what we all love is instant feedback, right? And I asked here to create a video application, and lo and behold, we've all been rickrolled because that's what it does. But the important part is that what we building, we want to see how it works. That feedback is so crucial. And that is one of the things that we're seeing more and more in the tools, is that the representation and the impact is shown to us. Now, this slide is a bit fuzzy, but it shows that we have specifications on the left and coding on the right. And we want to be able to switch between both easily. And if the coding changed, we want our documentation updated or specification. And if a specification changed, we actually want the code to update. So that kind of binary view is an important aspect that we're seeing more and more in IDEs coming up. Now, it doesn't have to be text. In this case, I'm generating infrastructure as code, and it's showing me diagrams or the impact of things in a different way. So I know there's code, but I can handle the cognitive load of the change in another way of looking at things. I can have visualizations of the whole code base to understand what the impact, what the change is. Again, just an example of a different way of visualizing the code and having me sort out different kind of problems. Now, it's not only about having different views. I can have different modalities. Maybe I want to do voice coding because, let's face it, we're typing more and more as a prompt. So why can't I just talk to the machine and it comes back? I'm hardly typing code, which was hard for us to kind of like say, open colon and all that stuff. Now I just need to ask and give it a natural language follow-up. We're seeing new ways of exploring code. Think of it as canvas, but canvas with code and requirements and designs mixed together. This is a great way of having multiple views on the code and your specifications. Now, even notebooks are something that is very popular with the data science folks. We're seeing this as executable documentation or code of your cloud environments. So a different kind of new hybrid development environment is kind of emerging from those things as well, for different reviews or different understandings of what has been changed. So eventually, we want actually the editor to adapt to the mental model of the user. So not just the text editor, but maybe a domain-specific or problem-specific thing that we want to solve. Okay, we got the editor, we're able to review, that kind of got better. Now, what do we do about the trust, right? Because that's the big thing. How much do we trust that stuff? Devin was one of the first ones who actually kind of showed us that there's a feedback loop from, hey, the chat is going, here's the requirements, and then kind of the browser and the editor and the shell, they all work in a continuous feedback loop system. So here you see kind of the run. It's looking at what is in the browser. It's copy and pasting, much as I said. Then it's looking at kind of the terminal. It's getting the error and changing the code. This is a really powerful improvement loop that we've seen that kind of takes a lot of the boilerplate that we've been doing manually. And that's often when you do automations, is that more and more, as you get more confident, is that automation take place. We can get terminal feedback, right? There's an error in the terminal, and we can add it to the chat, or we can add it to fix this code in our conversations with the AI. So that's one way. We can have browser error feedback. There's actually also an AI in kind of a Chrome now that explains things and can feed this back into your code editors as well. Now, the big thing is we have linting and we have errors, but it is indeed about execution. And we're still challenged on how do we do this? Will we run it in a sandbox? Is it going to be a preview branch? How do you get the feedback? Like this is an example almost from having a shadow environment where the AI is working on and kind of exploring different ways to check things, whether they're still okay and they're still executable. We can check for breaking changes from APIs. Like I changed something, did the documentation, what was changed, explain that to me as well. So more invisibility on kind of when things change and would break things. But I can also look things as, remember you're refactoring a big kind of legacy code. Did we reduce the code quality? Okay, I have code coverage, I have specific things, but also code familiarity. Like, do I still understand the code when I read this? So a tool like Code Scene actually helps to keep track of those metrics as well. And they will feed into the feedback loop of improving stuff as well. I can do automated threat modeling on my code, feed that in as feedback. There's no thing that, like all the tools we've been building, we could feed this back into that AI loop to improve. And that becomes really funny. When do we actually kind of trust the system to commit? I was very torn between, should I allow auto commit, or do I still verify certain things? And it's about like the threshold of how certain the AI is of a certain commit. I can still revoke this, of course, but there's a question like, how do we know it's good enough? How do we actually do this ourselves to know that it's good enough? We can go back with version control. So similarly in that conversation, we can roll back to a checkpoint before and check in, check out the changes. Obviously, there's things like data that need to be adapted, but this is very similar how we deal with kind of failures in our environments already. And now we have one agent kind of coding the stuff, but what if I have multiple things, right? So it's just going to be so complex for these things to create, for us to manage what they all create. So we need to have a certain level of autonomy, or we will hit a bottleneck of us reviewing these things all the time. Now, it even gets more interesting is that instead of just fixing the errors, we also want these tools to look for knowledge. So if I ask a question, I feed it documentation, I feed certain things, it will ask now, is this something that is important? Should we save this as a fact, right? This is another way of becoming more autonomous, is if it knows what to do, but it asks us for knowledge, and then the next time it actually knows. Now, we can go even further. Why are we still replying to PRs? It has all the context, it has our code, it has the way we want to do things. So let's have it just have answers of colleagues and get feedback back into the code. There's nothing stopping us there and feeding it back. Yes, we still say, do we allow it a yes or no? But that's kind of the trend that we're going for in those coding tools. And to kick it off at the end, this is a tool that actually improves your code through A/B testing with end user feedback. Are we going to go that far that we're taking into the end user feedback and have it change our code or our configs from production as well? Very interesting times to reflect on. Now, I personally had it multiple times that the AI started changing my specification files. So I also want a mechanism to say, AI, you cannot touch these things. Log the file is one example I found, but maybe we want to say things that it cannot change or touches everything. So it becomes more like an access control, what the agent can do, what the human can do, what the overrides there are as well. Now, I think what I've shown you, it is out there. It is not somewhere kind of in a lab, and it's really powerful. And I hope I've shown you kind of the different ways that the products of AI development have evolved to new things. And we're in an era that we have to stop building the things, but we build the things that build the things, right? That is the new level of development that is happening. That is the abstraction level that we're going. Here's a bunch of people that I really enjoy watching on LinkedIn or YouTube or X. And they gave me a feed of either new tools or reflections or new things they do. Really good. You can obviously also subscribe to my YouTube channel. It has all my talks that you can use and listen to if you want to. And let's open the floor for questions. If you want slides, connect to me on LinkedIn. And I would say this is the end.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Connect to Patrick. If you're not connected with Patrick on LinkedIn or anything like that, you're being ridiculous. So connect and chat. Patrick, very, very thoughtful session again. I'd love to ask actually, because maybe I should have asked Lisa this as well. I wanted to ask, when you show a lot of tools like this, what is your ideal kind of like set up an environment look like when you're building, not just playing but building?
My go-to IDE right now is Cursor, but I also am very. It seems like it's quite easy to swap things in text and out. So yes, I've been using V0 as well. I've been using GPT Engineer for other stuff. I just evaluated Windsurf, I think, which is giving a little bit of results. The nice thing is they're all kind of copying and mimicking the IDE in this case from VS Code. So all the plugins apply. So you just open it in whatever tool is the next best in the race. I don't care too much, like as long as they have like the similar keys and solve problems for me. There is still a little bit of glue code to be done for certain things like browser feedback and but that will just be a matter of time of being implemented. Like what we can do manually, we can automate on that perspective. So that's kind of pretty much my stack.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a question in here from Ori. Ori asks, Ori, first of all, says, thanks for a great summary of the features. How do you see the product's UX development to be amplified by AI? So I presume that means building, or how do you consider the UX of the product you are building, perhaps, being amplified by AI?
Yeah, so I touched on it a little bit briefly with the kind of the front end design, where you have the specifications of the user flows and the personas. This is right now not something that's very well connected in the tools, but I would believe that this is much like the requirements of the technical requirements, which you see now most in the tools, will become part of the business requirements. And these were the best examples I could find yet, but there's a certain disconnect between the two worlds and people building tools right now, but it's just going to get together closer. I think feedback from, let's say, analytics, I've shown the example of the A/B testing, actual users, what is important, what is not important. Imagine you feed that back as a requirement or as a fact. That kind of can open up a new kind of cycle of feedback while developing new features as well.
Yeah. And do you feel like with these AI powered tools or assistants, as it were, do you feel like the role of a dev has actually changed that much, or has it just been enhanced or increased productivity, but the workflow hasn't really changed that much? Is that fair, or do you think that's not giving justice to what how AI has changed?
I think the way I code has changed. That I mentioned that I'm mostly using prompts. I do the occasional coding tweak, but because I still know coding, I understand what I actually want in the coding. I had it a few times when I didn't set up the right directory structure, that it kind of, I couldn't understand it after 5 iterations how it went. So there's kind of moving towards more architecture or design decisions on the technical part. And I think we're getting closer to spending more time on the business requirement and say, oh, this is incomplete. We need this. Oh, yeah, it generated like that, but I didn't like it like that. So that kind of iteration is happening more. On the failure, yes, you're still the developer and you have to sort it out. The tools kind of help more and more fixing the tools. But I think it's still important that you understand what good looks like. So maybe we'll have to train more and read more and kind of read more documentation on kind of coding guidelines there as well. So that is how I think it's changing. It's ironically a little bit more ops than it is dev. Like we're babysitting part of the agents doing stuff and kind of nudging it in the right direction and dealing with failure. So for me, that's a small irony in the world.
Awesome. A couple more questions. Let's see if we can get through them in a couple of minutes. Farhaf asks, looking forward, what are a few hypothetical product features that you think would be great?
I think feeding things in from production more. There's still a heavy disconnect between the two tools. I had a discussion about, let's feed it in logs. And I've shown you in the loop, oh yeah, it looks at its own logs and being executed. But what about looking at the production logs and the things that actually fail? So kind of that would open up a new hurdle, to kind of like, not a hurdle, but a new door for all of a sudden you see things that it should do. This could also help in judging the impact of changes. Oh, it's only used by 2 people. Well, it could be 2 people that pay a lot of money. So that's another factor. But kind of those kind of feedback loops on service levels is there as well.
That's interesting, actually, because that also makes me think a little bit about the next session, which is happening in and around the performance of code and being able to almost, it's that feedback loop, right, of being able to say, well, let's understand the real performance in production, and can we actually pull that back into design and development decisions. Dan Hardiker's on as well. Hey, Dan, good to see you joining us. When using Cursor or Copilot and using prompt-driven development, I love that. I frequently find the implementation breaks in a way that AI can't figure out. How do you deal with these sorts of dead ends?
Yeah. So imagine you've given it like 50 prompts and you would paste them all in one big file and say, hey, use the specification. Likely, this will not work. I've learned that you really have to do small steps, almost like a developer, incremental steps, have a test, have a verification in there. So the smaller the step, the less I found that it breaks actually the implementations. I do see rabbit holes sometimes. I say it's not good. It tells me it should be like this. I've basically done a reset of the conversation then, and then I kind of like say, well, forget everything else, just start afresh, and I give it a new hint. And sometimes that's better because it kind of like takes another, almost, it's not taking another seed, but it's kind of like initializing a fresh conversation, almost like a fresh view on the problem there as well. So that's what I've done there.
Yeah, that's similar to actually a guy, Felipe, I know, a friend of the company as well. Felipe was talking about how once he's had a conversation and it turns into a dead end, what he does is he asks the LLM there to almost summarize what it had learned, and then using that to start almost a new conversation. But it's extremely hard to remove that context or try and adapt the existing context. It's actually easier to start afresh. Very interesting. And the last question, Patrick, according to you, Brajesh from Brajesh, according to you, which tool do you think is best for Figma to code for Next.js?
I'm not the front end specialist, but I think Figma probably has some kind of integration to it, but I'm mostly using the V0 to kind of the Vercel thing to kind of get things, but I don't know if it has a direct integration with Figma as well.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm sure it exists.
Why don't we throw that out into the chat again? If anyone's using front end, what is the best for Figma to code for Next.js that people think in the chat? Give your answers. For now, though, Patrick, another very inspiring session. Thank you so much for being a part of the iNative DevCon, and thank you for your session today.
My pleasure. Good luck.
And thank you. And if you wanted to hear more from Patrick, of course, the iNative Dev podcast, there are a couple of sessions there. One with Patrick about how AI is actually making changes to the DevOps space and workflows through pipelines. The second, of course, is very similar, a little bit similar actually to what we talked about here, but how it's really changing how we develop. And I think Patrick, I've never seen Patrick so animated and interested in the low level development of code till I saw him with AI. So that's great to see.